Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I want to welcome my guests. And I have always say these things that when the guest comes, they're coming with a couple of, a few things in their package that is very expensive in my mind. First, their time. It is a very precious commodity. And I want to thank Jonathan for coming and sharing some of it with us today. Second, their journey, their knowledge, all of these things that they have acquired in life that are able to help you and I to become better human spirits. I call them policies and procedures. And I want to thank you, Jonathan, for coming to Threads of Enlightenment to share with us about your journey and all the things that you have learned in your life so far. Thank you.
Well, it's a wild story, so I look forward to telling it.
I'm looking forward to hearing it. Tell the people a lot about what you have done so far, Jonathan. My people know that I call us creators. Tell us some of those things that you have created, whereby they are through books and programs, other things that you have available for them to have access to you.
Well, to date, I've written 14 books. My latest one is I'm really proud of. It's called The Enlightenment Project. And the subtitle is How I Went from Depressed to Blessed, and You Can Too. It's really a culmination of what I've learned from interviewing 100 spiritual leaders, ranging from the late Mother Teresa to the Dalai Lama. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But and in the 90s, I got on Oprah's show a lot because she really liked my books. And that kind of changed the trajectory of my life somewhat. But I've also written or done audio programs, one called Deeper Happiness. And I've spoken to a lot of people. I speak at corporations like Google and Microsoft. And I was with a spiritual community for 26 years that built hospitals. One of the places that we built a hospital is where you are, Ken, in Thailand. We built a hospital in Thailand for Burmese refugees.
Wow.
We built a school in Turkey for Syrian refugees. So I've done a lot of stuff.
That is awesome. I am excited about this conversation. Jonathan, go back with me to your childhood. How was it? How were you raised by your family? I tell people that our family, our parents loved us, but they were traumatized, and based on their trauma, they are now going to impart into us what they have learned, whatever behaviors those were, and however they saw the world, they now begin to impart into us. Talk to me about your family. What was it like?
Well, I was very lucky to have what I call a terrible childhood. And the reason I say that is because, by the time I had a midlife crisis at age 12, where I became very suicidal. And it's partly my family situation. My parents divorced when I was 3. And then my stepfather and mother used to argue like all the time. We'd have the cops called on us, and my stepfather used to sometimes beat me up. So I became very depressed and suicidal and realized like I need to do something else. I need to either kill myself or come up with some kind of hope. Well, what ended up happening is I got into self-help books, and my uncle was a hypnotist. So I got into hypnosis at the ripe old age of 12, became a certified hypnotist by age 13, and really put my attention into how could I change my inner world since I couldn't change my outer world. And that was very fortunate because I got an early start. I was able to do all these things that most teenagers don't do.
That is powerful, man. At such a young age. What an opportunity to begin at such a young age versus most of us, we start much later. Some of us, but it doesn't matter. Once they start, Jonathan, they start. And that's the beautiful thing. We tell them start anytime, start where you're at, right where you are right now. So talk to us, Jonathan, as to this young man. I mean, that is to be at this particular age, starting on this journey. And how did you manage your life and dealing with people at such a young age, starting your journey?
Well, it's important, I think, at any age that you're getting into self-help or spirituality or enlightenment, that you find your tribe. So I found a couple of friends that were into kind of the same thing I was. And we experimented with psychedelics. We experimented with meditation and hypnosis. And I started to see my life was getting a lot better. You know, I actually had a English teacher who helped me. He convinced me not to kill myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And,
Hmm.
I just found
Wow.
friends that were supportive of this, what my dad called weird stuff. And eventually I
Yeah.
kind of made a career out of it, that I saw that there were people who knew a lot more than I did in terms of finding peace or knowing how to connect with people. So I glommed onto them. First they were friends, but then they were ended up
Hmm.
being famous people like Oprah or Dr. Wayne Dyer or the Dalai Lama. And I became friends with a lot of these people and interviewed them, wrote books about them. You mentioned before the show that you had one of those books where
Hmm.
I interviewed 40 spiritual leaders. And it became kind of both a hobby, a vocation, and a lifestyle.
Yeah, I could see being exposed to all of that information, but even the thing that you were driven to them in the sense that it was a part of your journey as you began to embark on this. So here you had mentioned earlier that you had gone through some depression and so forth, and all of these things. How did you, with the knowledge that you were gaining, Jonathan, how did you manage that? Because that is a big, if you will, one of the big monsters that are out there that many people are facing, for lack of a better word, that they encounter in their life as they move through their journey. You encountered this as a young man, but you're surrounding yourself with those that are some of the leaders within the space of spirituality and personal development. How did you handle yourself within that space?
Well, I found that every now and then I'd find something that helped me that was very specific, like what I would call a technique or tool. For example, meditation or
Mm-hmm.
hypnosis or learning how to connect with people, neuro linguistic programming. So I became very much what I would call
Yeah.
a technique junkie. I wanted to learn all the techniques in personal growth and spirituality and find out which ones actually worked for me. Now, I should let you know, Ken, I'm also
Mm-hmm.
pretty lazy. So I specialized in techniques. I specialized in techniques that took under 3 minutes a day to do. And it ends up that's
Yeah.
a specific niche that a lot of people are interested
Yeah.
in. Like, if you're depressed, what can you do in under 3 minutes a
Yeah.
day that will significantly help you out? And so I learned what those things were and wrote books about them. And because they were very powerful techniques, the books did well, and I did well. And I mean to share a couple of those techniques with your listeners as well.
Oh, definitely. And I know we're still early on in our conversation, but you guys that are listening to us, I want you to get on Amazon, get anywhere, and start looking up Jonathan's books and purchase his books because, as I've said to you guys, when you're sitting down with the author reading his or her book, you are having a private conversation with them, and it's one on one. You are in your comfort zone and you're able to assimilate the energy that are in those words to will be deposited into your energy to help you to facilitate your growth and your movement from where you are. So Jonathan, talk to us because you're moving. How old were you when you started to talk to me first about your high school age? How did you manage that? How did you manage all of this trauma that were experiencing as a young child, 12 years old? Their house is not one of the safest place to be. How did you manage that? Being exposed to the hypnotism and all of those things, even in your household. How did you manage that there, John?
Well, I spent as little time around my house as possible. and made a friend who was just kind of a wild and crazy guy. He would do whatever he wanted. Is be kind of like, how would you act if you had
Yeah.
no fear whatsoever? So he would dress up in funny clothes or a
Wow.
funny hat, or he'd sing songs. Well, this guy, ended up being the most popular guy in school because he was fun to be around. And he was kind of like my first guru. His name was Brian. And
Yeah.
we ended up, instead of most high schoolers, they're very, trying to fit in and trying to look okay. Well, Brian and I decided that we were just going to have fun in life. If we had something to say, we'd say
Wow.
it. I remember one time we just, brought guitars out into the middle of the school court and started singing Beatles song. And by the time we were done with lunch, we had 1,000 people singing Beatles songs together. Just crazy stuff like that.
Wow.
And I started
That's
to see that,
powerful, though.
life could be fun if you knew how
Yeah.
to do that. And that was the start of a journey.
Yeah.
And, I had a lot of fears, so the hypnosis helped with some of that. But one of the things Brian did, I was very shy. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I'd never asked a woman out. And of course, I was a virgin too. And Brian said, you got to deal with this. You got to ask women out. And so he said, tell you what, if you get rejected by 10 women today, I will treat you to a trip to Hawaii. And that sounded appealing. So I decided I would, his philosophy was, if you're afraid of something, face it head on. So
nice.
I decided I would get rejected by 10 women as a way of facing that fear. I go up to the first woman. I'm literally shaking and sweating, beads of sweat dripping from my face. I go, hello to the first woman. And she turns around. She says, are you all right? Do you need an ambulance? Because she thought I was having a seizure. And I said, no, don't call an ambulance.
Oh, man.
I asked her out and she said she had a boyfriend, and, we went on, and it's interesting, Ken, the more you face your little fears, the easier it is to get over them. So the second woman was easier. The third was easier. The fourth was easier. And soon I was really having a good time because I was getting over this lifelong fear. But the seventh woman kind of ruined it. She, I asked, by now I kind of had a script. I said, hey, I don't know anybody and you look really nice. Would you consider going out with me? And she said, sure. Well, it never occurred to me somebody might say yes. So I said, sure what? And she said, yeah, I'd like to go out with you. I go, really? Okay. So I write down her phone number. And the next woman also said yes, and the next and the next. And I couldn't get rejected anymore because I was fearless. So eventually I got my 3 final rejections by doing the shaking thing and sweating thing. And I went to Hawaii. But when people ask me how I managed to speak to all these psychological, spiritual leaders in the world, I say, well, when I was 17, I got over my fear of rejection, and it took half an hour. So little things can make a big difference in a person's life.
It is always, Jonathan, isn't it? Always the little things that takes us to this crescendo. And I've said this so many times to my audience, that you have to look at life as like the I call it bolero type of approach, where it's just these quiet notes and these little things. And then the next thing you know, you have this cymbal crashing into this beautiful music. And it started with this small, simple thing, just like you did with that friend. That friend of yours got you to overcome something that a lot of people are still dealing with today, and that's to overcome fearfulness. And we know how that can keep you from being in a place of happiness, joy, and all of the other things that comes with it. So walk with me through college, Jonathan, and I'm trying to get to, how did you move and navigate to say, okay, I want to do psychotherapy? How did you get there? and what was those little things that took you to make that decision?
Hmm. Well, my family was upper middle class, and I saw that money was not the key to happiness. So I figured, well, maybe
Mm-hmm.
psychology would help. And so I became interested in psychology. I actually became the head of the hypnosis lab at UC Santa Barbara. Um, and I developed through hypnosis a photographic memory, so I didn't really have to study a whole lot, almost
Wow.
none. And um, with my extra
Mm-hmm.
time, I read self help books. And then my senior year in college, I met a spiritual teacher who really transformed my life. I
Mm-hmm.
spent 26 years with him, a lot of them living with him.
Wow.
And once again, I found that having mentors or having people who inspired me was really important to making progress. Uh, so to
Yes.
this day, I make sure that I'm around people who I feel know more than me. And uh, just like I figure it's like osmosis. If I hang out with a really high being, that some of that will rub off on me. But meeting this teacher was really transformative because he kind of pushed me to try stuff I'd never would have tried otherwise. Like building a hospital in Thailand, or doing these service
Yeah.
projects,
Yeah.
or even doing what he called experiments. Experiments were things that you tried
Yes.
for a short period of time to see what you could learn. I'll give you an example. I was brought up Jewish, um, and my parents were both kind of, I would call them anti-Christian. So
Mm-hmm.
after a couple of years with Justin, he told me to leave him and become a Christian for 6 months. And this was wild for me
Mm-hmm.
because I really was very biased against Christians. And now he was telling me that
Yeah.
that was my spiritual path for the next 6 months. And to my surprise, it ended up being very rewarding. And to this
Mm-hmm.
day, although I don't consider myself a Christian now, I do feel like I can tap into Holy Spirit energy really easily. And that's made a big difference in my life.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. So as we're walking through, because I want to get to the invitation of some of these world leaders that you started to have the opportunity to do interviews and so forth. And so you're in college, you've made this decision, and you are, because of this tool that you utilize from the age of 12. And I think it's a powerful tool that you're able to gain some advantages along the way, in the sense that people recognize that you are that you have the ability to utilize this tool effectively to get an outcome. So talk to me as you began to deal with the hypnotics and all of the different things, because at that time, Jonathan, people were scared about some of those things. Talk to me about it, because it's always the hippies and the ones far off the chart that are doing hypnosis and stuff like that. Talk to me about some of those encounters that you got as a result.
Well, it helped that I was able to make money as a hypnotist. I developed a photographic memory with hypnosis, and in college, other people wanted photographic memories. So I would charge them to develop a photographic memory, and soon people became interested in it and could do other weird stuff
Yeah.
with hypnosis. Um, so that was fun. And then, this was back in the 80s, where a bunch of people were taking drugs and ruining their body through things like cocaine,
Yeah.
and I could hypnotize
Mm-hmm.
people to give them the same high as cocaine, but without any cocaine. So
Wow.
when people
Yeah.
saw that some of these tools actually made their life and their feelings better, they were less afraid of it, and I was able to make a living. Eventually,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was able to quiet my mind with hypnosis and meditation. And you know how it is,
Yeah.
Ken, when you really quiet your mind, you're better able to receive messages. Well, one message I got, this is a pretty
Yes.
out there story, was I didn't have any money at the time. And I said, I kind of asked God, how can I make money? and I heard a voice say, you should do a video on Tantra sexuality. Well, I didn't really even know what tantric sexuality was. And I found out the video was going to cost $50,000 to make. And I didn't know anything about video. I didn't know anything about Tantra. My girlfriend at the time said I didn't know anything about sex. So I was really starting from square one. But a long story short, I ended up making the video, and it became the best-selling educational video in America, and it got on the cover of Newsweek. So I started to realize that maybe I can just listen for inner guidance.
Yeah.
And that could be how I think of my career. And that has been, I listen, I take time out each day, and I ask, how can I serve? And sometimes I get very clear direction.
Yeah. That's one of the things, Jonathan, I tell people that they miss because they're so busy in trying to live, that they are not getting the opportunity to truly live. And because of the busyness, because everything is constantly coming for their attention, and they're negating the most important person on the earth to gather their attention, and that's themselves. And a lot of people are afraid to even spend the time because their minds have been so programmed to be tossed back and forth. And I tell them that's part of it, because this is a new thing that you're bringing into your lifestyle. You're not going to sit there and then become a yogi in 2 weeks. You just can't do it, because you need to practice, and practice. But it's a great space, as you said, Jonathan, when you've learned and you bring yourself to quiet the mind, quiet the thoughts, and then look inside, because inside has the answers that you need. You were given the answers. It looked impossible on the outside, but when you're obedient to the instructions, you can reap much, as you did. So here you are. You achieved this great thing from an internal guidance. Now, once you've achieved this, how did you begin to navigate into the space when you get to folks like Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama? Because these are men and women that are, and I think one of the most precious gifts that we ever get to experience, Jonathan, as we begin to walk through our journey, and that is to become a servant. And these men and women that you got a chance to sit before were true servants. And you mentioned how it affected you so much so that you were building hospitals and doing all of these things, serving as well. So talk to me here, Jonathan, because we're looking at this young man growing spiritually, getting his wings. He's learning about meditation. He's learning to listen to the inside. And you are now going to step out from beyond there. Talk to us as to, once you achieve this, where did you started to move toward?
Well, I never thought of myself as a writer. I'm about 30 years old, and I called up a friend, and this was the time where they had answering machines. I was surprised that my friend answered, and I said, why are you home today? And she said, God told me to stay home today. And that was an unusual answer. So I said, how do you know it was God? And she said, well, when God speaks to me, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And I just found, I kept asking her questions about her internal experience. And at some point I said, it would be interesting to ask the world's experts how they connect with God or how they connect with their higher self. And that was the birth of the book that you evidently have, called The Experience of God, in which I interviewed 40 spiritual leaders. And one thing I learned from my spiritual teacher was to be persistent. So I don't know if you know the spiritual teacher, Ram Dass. He died about a year ago. Very impactful on my life. Well, I really wanted to interview him, and he really wanted to avoid me. So after about a year of pursuing him, he calls me and says, I get like 50 requests for interviews per week. I've just decided not to do any of them so I could better do service projects. But then he said, but I've never seen anyone as persistent as you. You've been pursuing me for a year, with like over 30 calls and 10 letters and things like that. So the reason I'm calling is I want to know if you're on a mission from God or if you're a complete lunatic. And I convinced him that I was on a mission from God. So he did the interview, and my thought is when you really feel like you have an important mission, you don't let little things stop you. And so, I got that book done and it became a bestseller. Oprah liked the book. And so that led to other books. And I realized that I could just kind of ask my higher self, what's my next project? And of course, as you know, the most recent project is called the Enlightenment Project. That's my latest book. And I kind of put all the wisdom I've learned from all these teachers in that book, because I think in a certain way, we're all on an enlightenment project. We're all trying to get more peace, more awakening. And really, we just need to know the best ways of doing that.
I agree with you, man. I think we all are placed here to do that journey. And from that journey, Jonathan, I believe, as you said, you gain all of these insights, these tools that we can utilize. But I think that in that journey also, we get a chance to find out parts of our gifts and the things that will cause us to live from a different space than, quote unquote, where society wants us, being on the 9 to 5 and so forth. I think it's hidden within us, and it's up to us to embark on that journey to find out what it is that is housed within us, so that we can release it, give birth to it, and then live from that space. And as we live from that space, we get a chance to become the teachers and the servants, as I say, and begin to serve mankind. And I think your projects and all of your books that you're out there, you have been able to put it into a format through your journey and then offer it and serve it to us, so that we can then take those things and drink of it, taste of it, experience it, and change our lives. And that's why I have been so excited about getting a chance to talk to you, because I wanted to know how you managed within your space as you navigate, and you had an opportunity to meet some of those that people who are listening would drop in awe of them. So you wrote the book, you got a chance to speak to Oprah and her show and so forth, and you're meeting people, influential people, as to their growth. How did this, Jonathan, begin to affect you, the individual, the person that is walking in this flesh? How did you begin to manage yourself within there? Because you're learning a lot, but you're still responsible for your growth. What is happening to Jonathan while all of this stuff externally is going on?
Well, at one point I had a couple of best-selling books, and I got very busy. And as I got busier, I started to lose more of my spiritual connection. So at some point, I just stopped writing and left that world really for about 15 years, so that I could focus on my spiritual connection and on service projects. And I think it's hard when you've gone down a wrong alley to admit, like, this isn't working anymore. If the goal of life is to become a more loving and peaceful person, I have now traded that for a certain amount of fame and fortune. And luckily, I was pretty honest with myself. I had a teacher who could be honest with me. And so I gave that up for a number of years, about 15 years. And people wondered why I was dropping off the bestseller list and such. But sometimes you have to evaluate your life and change course. So I did that, and now I'm kind of back. I have a podcast where I interview spiritual teachers called Awareness Explorers. And now I'm back writing books, and I feel more spiritually centered. The goal is not money or fame. The goal is how much love and peace and joy you can feel in life. And when you know your right
Hey,
target, it's easier to hit a target if you know what it is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm so glad that you spoke to this specifically, Jonathan, because a lot of people can get lost, and I tell them a lot of people are lost within the business of spirituality, and
Mm-hmm.
not and lose their spirituality. And I've seen that so many times. I can't even tell you how many, And yeah, I had to. I remember walking away at when people say you're at the pinnacle of your achievement. I walked away, took off, and stepped away from it because I was losing self. I was losing who I was and losing my identity. And then I had to reconnect in order, I believe, to become more in tune for myself, be true to myself. And I love the fact that you said you had to be honest with yourself. And this is where I tell people, this is where we all need to end up, right? Where Jonathan was talking about wealth and fame and all this stuff is not it. You got to come to a space where you're truthful to yourself. Investigate why and that, that, that unease that is sitting there for years. You have to take the time to go in and excavate what it is, learn from it, see it, and then become, as Jonathan states, the goal is that we become more empathetic. We are more loving. We become less judgmental towards people. You can only do that as you become less judgmental on yourself. And so as you learn to practice these principles on yourself, you will then be able to practice it on someone, to release it in someone else. If you can't, you got to find somebody to practice it. And the model, Jonathan, is yourself. Because if you could love you, man, Jonathan, you could love anybody else. If you could forgive you can forgive other people. So talk to me, Jonathan, because your book that you are just putting out and all of these collections of, and you mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk to some of the audience about some of the tools to utilize when it comes to depression, these 3-minute tools. Talk to them and give them some information so that they can utilize to help them while they're waiting for your book to come through the mail.
Yeah. Well, for people who are depressed, it's very important that they get exercise. That's shown to be a lot more effective than antidepressants. But one tool that I used, which was really helpful, it only took 10 seconds. You use it many times a day. When I talked to a lot of spiritual leaders, they were often mentioning the importance of gratitude for feeling better.
Yes.
And I had a friend who came back from India who seemed really happy and really grateful. And he told me that he had gone to India and his guru had given him a magical mantra to help him feel gratitude all the time. And I asked him what that mantra was, and he said, you'll have to go to India to get it directly from the guru. Well, I always want the best tools. So I traveled the 18,000 miles to get to India. And once there, I take a rickshaw for like 5 hours and I'm jet lagged and worn out, but I really want to get this new tool. So I finally get a chance to talk to this guru in the white flowing robe. And I tell him I want this magical mantra. And in his Indian accent, he says, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth. So he leans in to whisper in my ear. I'm very excited. And he says, whenever possible, repeat these words. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you. Well, I look at him, I go, that's it? I traveled 18,000 miles to get thank you, that's it? Well, he looks at me and he says, that's it is not the mantra. That's the mantra you've been using, and that makes you go, that will go nowhere. So I'm totally pissed off. And I look at him and I say, well, thanks for nothing. And he says, thanks for nothing is not the mantra. He says, you must say it from your heart many times a day. So when you eat good food, say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see your child or a sunset or your pet, say thank you from your heart. And soon you'll feel overwhelming gratitude. Well, I travel all that way, so I figured I'd use his mantra. I leave his ashram, I go
Yeah.
into a taxi, and it has air conditioning. Well, India is like 110 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
say, oh, thank you for this air conditioning. And then I go to my hotel room and there's a bottle of clean water. I'm very thirsty. Thank you for this clean water. I open up my laptop. I think, thank you for this amazing machine. I Skype my wife and I think, thank you for Skype. And then I'm talking to my wife on the other side of the planet instantaneously for free. And this hits me like how much we
Yeah.
have to feel
Yeah.
grateful for. Tears rolled down my face. My wife
Yeah.
said, that must have been some mantra. And I said, you have no idea, so it, I
That is
silently in
so
my heart
beautiful.
say thank you many times a day to God or the universe. And little things like that can help pull you out of stuck thought patterns that get us focused on, that's it, or this isn't the way I want it. And
Yeah.
instead really appreciate the moment.
That is absolutely beautiful. I love that story. And for those that are listening to us, you see, you don't have to spend all that money to get on a plane to go to India. Jonathan has it in his book, and he just told us some of it. So buy his book, purchase his book so you can get a lot of that information because it is life changing, as he said. And I practice that in my life. And it is amazing how it brings you present. And one of the principles of personal growth is to be in a space to be present and being thankful for everything that comes in your space. It's amazing how we have gone through living life, not being grateful for many things that come to us. The simple things, as Jonathan says, some of those simple things, water, the fact of Skype, the technology that was available for him to speak to his wife, to have a conversation about how he felt and what has happened, the change that took place in his life. All of these things. Jonathan, where I live in the morning, I come up and I hear the roosters and the wind, and I come out my front door and I just stand and walk the patio just to feel that every single morning because I'm grateful of those sounds, the wind, and I constantly are saying thank you for the fact that I'm able to even experience this because many people don't even take that time to experience what I'm experiencing every morning coming out of a patio. My eyes to rub my eyes, feeling the wind on my face. So, Jonathan, I want you to talk about some of those things as you move through life and you are now beginning to serve. Talk to us about some of those people because I know people are coming in your space. You have your podcast and you encounter people all over. When someone comes in your space, Jonathan, and you guys are having a conversation and you're giving them some of those tools, talk to me about some of those stories that you're hearing as a result of someone taking the tool that you had just gave to them and move them through from one space that they were in that were stuck into a new space. Talk to me about a couple of those stories.
Well, one interesting story and encounter I had with Oprah was very impactful. The first time I was on her show, during the commercial break, she came up to me and said how much she really liked the story about my dog in the book I had. And she asked me what my dog's name was. His name was Rama. And she said, how's Rama doing? And I said, well, he's actually not doing very well. He started to have seizures. And Oprah said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll be sure to pray for him. And that was our entire off-camera conversation. Well, 2 years later, I'm on her show again, and she comes up to me and she says, good to see you again. By the way, how is Rama? And I didn't put it together that Oprah, the most loved woman on earth, would remember a 10-second conversation from 2 years ago. So I said, who's Rama? And
Wow.
she said, Rama's your dog. He was having seizures. How's he doing? I prayed for him. And I said, well, actually, he's better. And I said, how'd you remember that? And she said, well, growing up, I had a really hard childhood. I was raped twice by the time I was 15. I had a stillborn child. I was in the what was called the retarded people's class at school. And I said, well, what do I have going for me? And the conclusion I came up with was that the only thing I had going for me is that I liked people and I could be kind. So Oprah's saying that she devoted her life to kindness. And then she said, looks like that turned out pretty good, don't you think? And indeed it had. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the studies now show that the number one way to boost your own happiness level is doing an act of kindness for someone else. So, if you're not feeling very good, kindness can be a great tool that's available to everyone to feel better. And it's also, we live in a tough world. So doing acts of kindness not only make you feel better, they obviously make other people feel better. So little simple tools like this, when I asked the Dalai Lama what his favorite technique was for connecting with inner peace, he said, kindness is my favorite tool. Kindness is my religion. And I therefore have tried to devote my life to little acts of kindness, saying what I appreciate, maybe getting somebody a cup of tea, all these little things, they can take you out of, thinking about yourself and worrying about yourself. And that's another example of a tool. Although, in the Enlightenment Project book, I give some secret tools that, come from Tibetan masters and things like that. But I like the tools that everybody can do in normal life.
Yeah, my kids, Jonathan, I would take them because they had things, because I wanted to make sure that they were able to have the comfort of living, as they say. And I would make sure that I take them into areas that were less afforded things. We would purchase things in common, give people and connect. I wanted them to be able to see and to be, because I believe that when we are in that space and when we're giving and releasing that kindness, I believe our reward that we get from it is joy. It's a more powerful force, I think, that resides within us, that when we begin to step out and do something where we're not expecting anything from someone, you get this joy that is in there, that is awakening, and it becomes contagious, and you begin to experience this beautiful energy being released. And I think one of the things that is dormant within us, happiness, yes, but joy, there is something else beyond that that is more powerful, and we have that exchange of joy when we kind of mingle with each other, and we're able to experience some of that. Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been an enlightening conversation. Those that are listening to Jonathan and I, he has several books. He's mentioned many, and I want you to buy them all. Study them, learn, because here at Threads of Enlightenment, the purpose of someone like Jonathan that comes, that has all of this information, these tools, is so that you and I can become better human spirits. Buy them for your friends, buy them for family, buy them for yourselves, and read them and watch what happens to you. Jonathan, thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure, Ken.